Okay, this is a topic that comes up quite a bit on audiophile forums, the subject of running a DAC directly into a power amp without using a preamp. So basically going source direct from a DAC, either standalone or built into a streamer or CD player, that has some form of volume control so you can connect it straight to a power amp. Personally, I've had mixed results, mostly negative, but I know some people swear by it, so let me know what you think in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button while you're down there. So, historically, I've never been a fan of running my system without a preamp. Not just because it limits you somewhat practically to a single source, but because it's always had a mostly negative impact on the sound, in my experience. However, I've been running my office system without a preamp for the past few days, and I've been surprised at the results. I'll show you what that setup looks like later on and let you hear it. But first, let's talk about why this seems like a good idea, but might not work well for everyone. So if you take the preamp out of the chain, you're simplifying the signal path, and in theory, that should be a good thing, right? Fewer components mean less noise, better detail retrieval, more transparency, and modern high-end DACs like the one in my dCS Rossini have such well-designed analog output stages that a preamp shouldn't be necessary. So going DAC-direct should work fine in theory. You're getting maximum transparency, nothing between your source and your amp, just pure signal. You're also lowering the noise floor, since every extra box, every extra cable, every extra power supply is another potential source of interference. And there's the cost factor. Good preamps aren't cheap, and neither are the interconnects you need to hook them up. But in my experience, even the best DACs don't always sound their best when you remove the preamp. A lot of times, music can sound thinner, brighter, less engaging. You lose body, depth, and weight. Volume control can also be an issue in DACs that use digital attenuation, as you start losing resolution when you turn the volume down. So if you listen at lower volumes and your DAC is using digital volume control, you're probably losing the very resolution that you're paying a premium for in your expensive DAC. Then there's impedance matching to worry about. Many DACs have a relatively high output impedance, and if your power amp has a low input impedance, the mismatch can weaken dynamics, reduce bass weight and impact, and just mess with the overall frequency balance. And then there's also gain to consider. Some DACs put out too much voltage, which makes the volume control overly sensitive, where even small adjustments make the sound output from the speakers difficult to adjust. So, when does running DAC direct actually work? Well, if your DAC has a really well-designed analog output stage, something like an MSB, a DCS, or a molar, and your power amp has a high input impedance, say 50,000 ohms or higher, then it might be a good fit. If your DAC has a proper analog volume control and not a cheap digital attenuator, then that's another point in favor. And if your listening is oriented more towards detail retrieval from your recordings, and you like that hyper-transparent, ultra-clear, super dynamic kind of sound, then going direct might work really well. On the other hand, if your system leans a little bright or a little thin, or if it just feels like it's missing some flesh on bones, then a good preamp can bring back that harmonic richness, that weight and warmth, especially when you introduce a really well-made tube preamp. Now, I've tried running source direct many times over the years in different systems and with different components, and every time I've tried living without a preamp, I've always ended up going back to one. An experience that stands out was about 10 years ago when I had a big horn array powered by tube monoblocks and an Aesthetics Calypso line stage. I picked up an Audio Aero Capital Mark II CD player, mainly because it had a reputation for having a really good built-in volume control, and a lot of people were running it direct into their amps. So I figured I'd try it, but the system lost depth, dynamics, and body. Maybe there was a little more detail, but the trade-off wasn't worth it. And I've repeated that experiment over the years with different gear, and every time I've gone back to an active line stage. So, a few weeks back, I picked up a pair of Voxativ Zeth speakers. These are a small floor stander with a single full-range driver per side. They're very detailed and dynamic, but, honestly, they're a bit of a pain to set up properly, and I haven't really dialed them in the way I want just yet. I've been running them with a Don Sax D 2-line stage and Don Sax Kootenai KT66 power amp. It sounds good, but the dCS gear isn't fully balanced, and I was hearing a little bit of unwanted background hash. Nothing terrible, but I wondered how things would sound fully balanced and using a battery-powered amp like my Veloce Audio Saetta. So I pulled the dCS Preamp power amps and ran the dCS Rossini DAC straight into the balanced Veloce Audio Saetta Monoblocks. Now, on paper, the amps aren't an ideal match for the 96 dB efficient Zeths. They're rated 320 watts into 8 ohms and 400 watts into 4 ohms. They're a hybrid design with 6 H30 input tubes driving a bridged Hypex Class D output stage. They're really designed for a more demanding load, but they're battery-powered, dead silent, and they lean a little to the warmer side of neutral, so I figured they're worth trying out. They've sounded great on every speaker I've paired them with over the last few years, including higher efficiency speakers, like the Altec Lansing A7, Valencias, and even corner horns. So I pulled the dCS gear, kept my Iconoclast speaker cables, and ran Iconoclast XLRs straight from the Rossini's balanced output to the Saetta monoblocks, and I was pretty pleasantly surprised. It was way more dynamic and detailed than I expected. In past attempts at running DAC-direct, I always ran into dynamic compression, but this time it was punchy, vivid sounding, with a nice wide and deep soundstage and good tight imaging. The level of detail and transparency was way ahead of what I was hearing with the D2 preamp and Couturier power amp. I could hear everything in the mix with nothing added or removed. But, and this is the big one, a lot of the music I like to listen to became a bit bright and fatiguing. The really well-recorded stuff sounded great, but a lot of older classic rock tracks from the 70s sounded thin and sterile, more so than previously with the dCS amps. In my other system, which is all analog, running ProAC D40R speakers and a Synthesis A-Oni 100 Titan tube amp, everything sounds at least good. Some recordings sound great, but nothing sounds outright bad. But with this dCS, Veloce and Voxativ setup, it could sound pretty stunning or completely unlistenable depending on the recording. So I might play around with cables, isolation, maybe some tweaks to speaker placement. But from experience, I think I'm going to end up adding a fully balanced preamp that doesn't kill the detail and transparency, but brings back some warmth and fullness to the sound. I'll probably try something like an Audio Research Ref 6 or a BAT VK53 SE, trying to keep to a budget of under $10,000 used. If you have any recommendations, please drop them in the comments below. So just to summarize, the good stuff. Running a DAC-direct into a power amp removes a component from the chain, increases transparency, reduces noise, and simplifies the setup. If the DAC has a high-quality analog output stage and good volume control implementation, then it can sound incredibly detailed and transparent. The bad stuff. Many DACs don't drive power amps properly, often due to impedance mismatches or weak output stages, and you can end up with a thin sound, a loss of dynamics, or volume control issues. Some digital volume controls degrade resolution at lower levels, which can obviously affect sound quality. And then, the ugly. If the synergy isn't right, going DAC-direct can make a system sound bright and overly analytical, and pretty lifeless. Music loses its body and weight, and you lose the emotional engagement. I've got some sound samples lined up so you can hear what I'm talking about, but I've put those in a separate video. You'll find the link in the description below, or you can click the link on the screen. Anyway, please hit like and subscribe. I have more content coming out soon.
But the old lady don't know what it's worth. She found out what I paid, she gonna give birth. When I'm 6 feet under and you're feeling lost, don't sell my gear for what I told you it cost.